Hey NBA 2K fans, in this video we're going to talk about the NBA 2K coach settings, and I'm going to go through each of the options and tell you what I have them set on and give you some other information about the options available, and then that'll help you get a better idea of how you want to set up the coach settings for you. This is kind of a continuation of my last settings video I did on the controller settings, which I'll put a link to that up in the corner, which when the video's done you can kind of link over to it if you want to watch it. If you're new to the channel, click the subscribe button, click the bell to get notified whenever I upload anything new so you don't miss a single NBA 2K video that I put out. And while you're here, check out my My League series, my fictional My League. I'll put a link to that up in the corner, the left-hand corner of the video, so you can watch that when you get done too if you want. So, all right, so let's get started. Let's talk about these coach settings and what I've got them on. The first coach setting is the Adaptive Coaching Engine, ACE for short, and there are two options, on or off. And down at the bottom it says determine if you'd like to game plan on your own or let the CPU do it for you, which I believe refers to the coaching game plan. So I don't know everything that ACE does, but I do believe with a high degree of certainty that if you have the Adaptive Coaching Engine off, then your defensive settings that you might set for an individual team are on auto. But if you turn it on to off, then whatever defensive settings that you have set in the individual coaching game plans will take effect. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. Now this coach game plan can be found in a couple spots. The first is you can find it under the, if you're like in a My League or My GM file, you can find it under the coaching tab under coach game plan. But you can also find these options if you're in another play mode by pausing the game and going into the menus and finding the settings that you want to change. So this is also found if you pause the game, you can find it. But inside of My League, you go into this coach game plan. When you do that, you have an all teams coach game plan and you have individual team ones. When you have an individual team one, underneath that you have another option under there for team specific defensive settings. So it's my belief that ACE controls whether these settings apply or not. So if you have ACE on, then it won't matter what you put in here because your defense will just run on auto. But if you have ACE off, then whatever you have here, like if you have on ball pressure to type, then what's going to happen is that that's how your guys are going to be defended. So with ACE off, this would then make your defensive settings apply in a game. Now you can still leave these to auto if you wanted and have ACE off, and it's certainly possible that ACE controls some other things, but I think this is the main thing that ACE probably controls. Now in my situation I have Adaptive Coaching Engine off because I do like to set the defensive settings. However, just a quick note on defensive settings, the real question is, can you win on auto and not set defensive settings? The answer is yes. As long as you can score, your defense will hold up if you can stay in front of your man. If you can't score, then that's when you have a problem because auto settings tend to break down, and if you're playing really good players, they know how to make that auto defense break down. And so in my opinion, after you're more familiar with the game, you're going to want to go in and set these settings. But if you're new to the game, certainly turn that to on. But after you've got a lot of experience, then you might tend to turn it off and take care of your own game plan yourself. I guess one other thing I want to kind of add about Adaptive Coaching Engine, I guess in some ways you could kind of look at Adaptive Coaching Engine as CPU assistance. So I always think the better player you are, the less CPU assistance you should get. And that's not to say you're not getting CPU assistance at all time because they're controlling the other guys. But if you're playing in a league and you want everybody kind of on the same playing field and you want everybody to be manual players, then certainly you'd want to have that off as well. The next coach setting is the timeout option. There's two options here, auto and manual. Difference is that under auto, the CPU is going to call timeouts during the game for you. Like for example, if you get down 10 points, it's probably pretty likely the CPU is going to call timeout. Now, the other option is manual, which means that you could go the whole game and no timeouts are going to be called because you have to decide to call them. So, we could get into a whole nother video on timeout strategy. The question is, what should you put it on? Well, if you're new, you certainly want to go with auto, just so your team calls timeouts. I suppose you could argue that if you're a true sim player, you have everything set on manual and you're going to decide your own timeout strategy. So now I play against people that are non-timeout callers, and then you got the timeout callers. I got one person I can think of specifically who I love playing. He's like, you got to call a timeout every quarter. But I grew up in an era with watching Bob Knight, and Bob Knight didn't believe in calling timeouts under really hardly any circumstances, especially if his team was getting murdered. He just leave them out there. So I've kind of also adopted that in my kind of philosophy, just grew up with it. So, but typically I leave it to auto just so I get timeouts called, and periodically, even though you got it on auto, you can always call your own timeout. You just got to make sure that you have enough. But I'd put it on auto. If you're truly a hardcore sim player, set it on manual, call your own timeouts. And that's kind of how I feel about timeouts. Maybe sometime I'll do another video on timeout strategy. All right, the next coach setting is player minutes. Again, just like timeouts, there's two settings, auto or manual. And so, obviously if you're new, you're going to leave it on auto. If you're a manual subber, you'll put it on manual. And again, if you're a true hardcore sim player, you're going to put all these things that have an auto option to manual. But, if you're an auto subber, you're going to just leave that to auto. And that's what I do. I auto sub. I'll put a link to a video up in the corner about the difference between manual and auto subbing and why I use auto. If you want to watch that, there's a link up there for that. Next coach setting is substitution. Same thing. You have two options, auto or manual, and I look at that just as the same as the player minutes. CPU is going to decide to sub people in. If you turn that on the manual, no one's going to come in. So you'll have to manually sub people in as you see fit. Again, true hardcore player, sim-wise, you're going to go manual here. New, go auto, or if you're just an auto subber, you're going to want to leave that to auto. All right, the next coach setting is substitution method. First option you got is rotation. The second is fatigue. And essentially what this means is that if you have it on auto subs, it'll substitute players in based on which of these options you have. So if you've got it set on rotation, then it's going to use whatever rotations are set in the game as far as minutes are concerned to decide when people come in or out. But if you got it set up on fatigue, then as players get more tired, that's going to be the determining factor. In my experience, I'm not sure fatigue always works 100% properly, so I never use fatigue, and instead I'd rather see rotation used in my auto substitution patterns. Let me show you where these rotation numbers come from. Now again, inside of my league or my GM file, you're going to have a coach game plan screen where you can kind of set these rotation minutes, and you can kind of determine, okay, I want this guy to come in for so many minutes, this guy to be play for so many minutes. And that's the guideline that the CPU would use if you're under auto subs. It won't come out exactly that, but I go in and I manually set these before each game to let the computer know who I want to start and also roughly how many minutes I want them to get. The CPU will try and do that to the best of its ability. Now, if you're not in a my league or my GM, I'm assuming that each team's roster has a set number of minutes that 2K has put in there by default. That's how rotations would be done. But the bottom line is, as far as this setting goes, I set it to rotation and not fatigue because I don't think fatigue is perfect. I'd rather have a little bit more control over how many minutes everybody plays. The next coach setting is offensive play vision. Under here you got three options: all plays, user plays, and off. Now what the offensive play vision is it shows a diagram of the play that's going to run on the court. So let me show you an example of what the play diagram might look like. All right, so just give an example of play vision. Play vision is just the artwork that shows up on the floor. You can see some things going on, tells the players where to go, kind of me where to pass. I'll just do a play here real quick to show you if I call a play for this player. then this little circle tells me where to go, and then this tells me the screen and kind of gives me some idea of what I ought to do to run the play. So play vision kind of helps you determine what's going on the floor and where your players are going to go, and it's very helpful when you're trying to run plays out of your playbook. All right, so that's what offensive play vision is. So if you're new, obviously you're going to have that to all plays. I just kind of recommend everybody leave that on. User plays, I'm not sure actually works properly, and so you want to leave it on all plays if you want offensive play vision. I haven't checked it lately, but there was a time when that didn't work properly. Now, if you're an all manual player, truly Hall of Fame level, I look at the play vision as kind of CPU assistance, and there was a time in league play where I didn't even use play vision, and so I think it makes it a little bit more interesting to not see what the plays are. You have to kind of know them when you call them, what's going to happen. But for the vast majority of the time, you just want to leave that on all plays so you can see what's going on. Next coach setting is play vision display. You have an option for full, light, and full, or light. And honestly, I just put this on full. I haven't tested to see what the differences are between these two. In fact, I think there are times when it just hasn't worked to the fullest extent that it could, but I just always leave this on full. So if you're going to have offensive play vision on, that's what I do. Just leave it on full. Next coach settings option is play calling messages. You have the option for show all, user plays only, or off. I always set this to show all. I don't know that it always shows though if a play is called. I think if it does show, I think you have to have the heads up display up in the right hand corner where it shows the player stats and what signature, what badge is activated. It might show there, but honestly, I think it might be broken this year. I can't remember. But in any case, every year I just always set that to show all. One of the reasons I do like to set it to play calling messages to show all is if I happen to record my games and watch them later, it helps me remember which play I called or that was called on auto for me. It makes it a little bit easier to remember which play is which. So that's another good reason to have calling messages to show all, is if you're recording your games later, if it does show, you can at least see which play it was. The next coach settings option is offense play calling. There's two options here, auto or manual. And the difference is auto, the CPU is going to call play for you, where if you have it on manual, then you have to call your own play. So I look at this like I do most of the auto and manual ones. If you're a true hardcore sim player, manual all across the board on all these auto and manual ones. But if you're new, obviously set it on auto. Now, I have it set on auto. Now, just because it calls a play doesn't mean it's going to be the best play, and you can always change the play even if you got it set on auto play calling, and that's the strategy that I take. I personally like it on auto because I like the coach to have an impact on the game. And if the coach is calling the plays and I'm doing what the coach wants to do, then to me, it's more of a way to have the head coach have an impact on the game. So that's why I have it on auto. The next coach setting is defense play calling. And again, two options, auto and manual. And just like offense, you can call plays on defense, whether you want to be in zone or man-to-man. Now, I'm a man-to-man player the whole game. I don't want the CPU to change me out of man-to-man and put me in a zone for some reason. So I always have this set to manual so that I don't get thrown into a zone just because the CPU decides that they want to run a zone. And I've seen this CPU call zones before. As I've been playing against a team, all of a sudden the CPU team will be in a zone, and I'm like, wow, I've never seen that before. So it does happen, so that's why I have this on manual. I encourage everybody to be a man-to-man defensive player and never use zone. And so if it were up to me, everybody would have this on manual and everybody would be playing man-to-man. All right, the next coach settings option is late game fouling. There's two options here, auto and manual. Typically, I leave this on auto, and that's because if there has to be a foul to enter into the free throw game at the end of a game, the late game fouling set to auto means the CPU players are going to hustle there and do what they would in real life, and that's actually foul somebody quickly. If you got it on manual, you got to do it automatically. And to be honest with you, I find it very difficult to track a guy down sometimes. And so it makes it unrealistic for me that I wouldn't be able to foul when normally I would be able to. So I typically leave this on auto. Now there are some times that I switch it over to manual towards the end of a game if I know the CPU's going to foul when I don't want them to, and either I've conceded the game or there's a little bit more time on the shot clock than 24 seconds, and I know I'm going to get the ball back. It's like it's a one possession game, and I don't want to foul with 32 seconds on the clock and give them free throws, when if I just held them, I'd have 8 seconds to score and maybe tie the game if I held them on that defensive possession. So the late game fouling logic doesn't work perfectly, and so I set it on auto, but there are times that during the game I'll switch it over to manual. All right, then under coach settings you got team communication, and then there's an option for offense, defense, off, defense only, offense only, and those are the options you have under there. Now what this does is it puts some text above the player's head to kind of tell you what that player's thinking. So if you're watching the game and you see a player with his hands waving, and you might see text above his head that says I'm open, or it might say mismatch, or I'm back. And so I leave this on just to see it. If true manual players, you're going to have it off, but I'm not sure it's like a completely developed system, so I leave it on just to see what it's going to be telling me. Over the years, this will probably get better. So anyway, especially if you're new, just leave it on. All manual player, turn it off. I personally leave it on offense and defense just to see what kind of information I get. And that's kind of some of the stuff I get that I told you about. All right, so that's a good overview of the coach settings. That's what I use. That's why I use it. And some additional information about each of the coach settings that hopefully will help you figure out how you want to set up the coach settings to get the kind of game that you want out of NBA 2K. So you got any suggestions, anything I left out, anything you want to put in the comments, put them below. Let me know what you're thinking, and if you got any questions about this or any other NBA 2K topic. While you're here, check out my My League series. I have a My League, fictional My League series running, and a My League, My Career. Be sure and check those out. And in the meantime, I'm Coach 2K. I'll see you on the court in the next video, and I appreciate you watching. Thanks.